happening, how do you do it?
So that's a great question. So if you think about if you think that what you're interested in is the creation, transmission, and adoption of ideas, and you believe that the way in which that happens, or the evidence is that the way in which that happens is through networks of human beings, then what the focus of the funding intervention should be is on fostering the interaction of those scientific and economic networks. So one of the concerns that, and the reason that the work that I've been doing in the United States and now Australia and France and so on, I have to go to Paris so often. It's just terrible what you have to do to make a living nowadays. But then that should be the focus of the funding intervention. How do we foster the highest quality networks? How do we bring in and engage smart people to think about particular areas that are of interest? The concern that I think we had in the United States, and I think that people are having in Europe and Australia, is that the focus has become too much on bean counting, that the focus has become one of, we're going to count publications and we're going to count patents and we're going to count things. And that really is not the way in which you foster high quality science. The focus should be on the creation, transmission and adoption of knowledge. Publications and patents are one way in which that happens. But
they're the end of the line, aren't
that's
they,
right.
in some cases? So what is it that you...
Or part of the end of the line.
Yeah. In the patents it might be the end of the line. In the papers it's part way along perhaps. If that's the case, what do you do in the kind of analysis that you do that is different from what the bean counters are doing?
So the focus in many funding agencies has been, we've given money, now let's count what comes out of that grant or that contract. And that misses what science is about. So rather than this bean counting exercise where you're trying to arbitrarily say, I gave money and I'm going to tie a string to something that came out of that, what our focus is on identifying the individuals that are associated with those funding and then capture the activities of those individuals. And if you think about the transmission of knowledge as maybe happening over 20 years, understanding that black box of that transmission of knowledge and fostering that's what our focus is.
If you are therefore following an individual who
and groups of individuals,
groups or organisations or a university or a field, if you're following them, by the very nature of what they're doing, they may never come out with a thing at the end of it. What you're saying is others will be taking their work and coming out with things.
Exactly. So if you look, for example, my colleague Stefano Bertuzzi and I, he's at NIH, looked, for example, at the NIH initial funding of TNF-alpha, which Lloyd Olds discovered in 1975. And then if you look at the trace study through to some of the drugs that came out of it, Embracade being one of them, these were multi-billion-dollar drugs. They were miracle drugs in many ways in the effect that they had on people's health. And when you trace it back, Lloyd Olds never developed any of those drugs, but you can trace through how his research
got
used through his collaborators, both individuals, and then how that baton got passed over 20 years. And that's what I mean by unpacking the black box. Bear with me a second. The concern that we, I think, have is that if you rely simply on bean counting publications, it creates perverse incentives, because then people hold
tailor
the
what
stuff,
they're doing to
tailor
them.
What they're doing. There's not a focus on replication, and there's a great deal of concern that there is science can't be replicated. And John Ioannidis points out 85 to 90% of life science bioassays can't be replicated by big pharma, and more falsification of research. And that's what happens.
Where does that leave a small country with New Zealand with a small amount to invest and a definite focus on wanting to see benefits from it? Agreeing you can say the scientists won't necessarily deliver the end result, but you certainly want New Zealand's businesses through joint ventures or whatever doing so. Where does it leave it with our current funding approach? I'm very interested you talk about following the individual or their organisation or their field through, because presently those individuals are going back year after year after year on what are patently or what are clearly long-term research projects, and having to reapply.
Right. So think about the funding mechanisms. So, for example, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, there have been a number of studies of the Howard Hughes model, which funds researchers, not projects, and bets on, the high-quality, networked researchers versus a project-oriented approach, which was historically the approach at NIH. They moved to more pioneer awards and so on. And that approach has actually been a bit more effective. And if you take a look at ANU, University of Melbourne, it's been very successful in targeting seed funding to bring together researchers who were not hitherto brought together, and that's helped catapult University of Melbourne's research prowess forward. So in terms of what New Zealand can do, limited amount of money, place much more strategic bets.
We have researchers doing amazing things in the health sector, say, cancer research, Parkinson's research. Again, what you're talking about there clearly has, for humanity, a very significant benefit. When you come back again to the New Zealand taxpayer saying, how do we maximise it? You're left in a situation where it may be joint ventures overseas, or it may just be used by overseas.
Right.
Does that affect the decisions that a small country makes, or do we say, no, we stay in there? We've got these star scientists doing this stuff, and there is a wider return to our community from it.
So that's up to the policymakers. You very rarely hear these two words together. I'm a humble economist. And I wouldn't, one of the things that we're trained to some extent, at least when we're building data infrastructures along the lines that we're doing, is you present the evidence and then the policymakers make those kinds of judgments based on the data and information that are provided.
You just made the point earlier, though, that you don't know who is going to pick up and make use of what the science is doing. You just know that it's good science that's being done.
So the policymaker has to make some calls because there are limited resources, right? So you can start to get some sense when you're unpacking that black box. Any good program manager can tell you which researchers are doing well and which researchers are not. And you could write down what the processes are where you could see, man, that field is taking off and this field is not. So it's not a question of basic research or not basic research. It is you could see where the hot areas are.
One more thing is missing from this, which is even if the scientists are doing well, are our businesses and our entrepreneurs fitting into the mix well enough? And is that perhaps where some of the focus needs to be to facilitate those networks that you're talking about? It's already happening with the Crown Research Institutes being lifted up.
And Murray Bain's been thinking pretty hard about this stuff. I've had some good discussions about him at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and a lot of those processes are certainly being considered in terms of the private sector becoming engaged.
Thank you. Good talking to you. Julia Lane in New Zealand, Senior Managing Economist at the American Institutes for Research presently, formerly from Palmerston North. So there is another one we lost overseas. I understand it was for...
The sister in Tauranga.
Oh, there we are. I was going to say it was for romantic purposes that we lost you, however, not...
No, that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.